Hi, my name is Trey Loney, and I did a critical analysis of The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, along with research just about how Edgar Allan Poe had a very distraught life as a man early on in his life and throughout his life that really had an effect and played a major role in why his poems mirrored his everyday life. My essay thesis was a life fulfilled of distraught throughout Edgar Allan Poe's life led to Poe making mad stories to reflect his life. So a lot of Poe's stories, especially A Telltale Heart, reflect a lot of what Poe was going through throughout his entire life with the, just the alcohol abuse, the substance abuse, just the depression, the loneliness, the anxiety was really shown in A Telltale Heart. It's just every story seemed to be strange and just reflect a deeper meaning that if you didn't really know what Poe was going through, you wouldn't understand. You wouldn't understand why is he making stories that are just so out of this world weird, and especially for the time frame that he was in, there's just a lack of research to show what he was actually going through. My main points were throughout Poe's poem, A Telltale Heart, Poe shows the reader how past trauma may have formed a mental handicap over him. And with that, one thing that would be considered past trauma in Poe's life would him losing his parents, both of them, at 3 years old, and then going on to be orphaned at a very young age, which leaves a lot of gray area for him to develop in key parts of his life that really shape who he's going to be in the future. With that, he became, throughout all of his stories, you could really see where that had played a major role in his life because of the fact that, he was sad, depressed, and, all that stuff. So my second main point was Poe demonstrates an issue with obsession throughout the story. And not only obsession, but he shows throughout other stories that I had researched, he does show, substance and alcohol abuse throughout those stories. I mean, you can pick that up by how the narrator of each story is acting. And it's shown in The Telltale Heart. Obsession is shown majorly throughout the whole story because you can see how the narrator is obsessed with the old man's eye and how he can't stand to even live or be around the old man's eye. It just drives him mad. And you can see how maybe that obsession reflects to Edgar Allan Poe with his obsession with, just the darkness and the despair that he was drowning in throughout his entire life. It was very difficult for him. My fourth main point was throughout the story, Poe demonstrates how the narrator can be seen as unreliable, as his perception of the events that had taken place were skewed by his mental state. This can be shown throughout Edgar Allan Poe's life because he was an introvert and did not talk to very many people, which could lead to a very skewed thoughts when being alone all the time. And that's shown by tons of research, tons of studies. If you're not out and talking to people and going and doing other things, obviously you're going to get in your own head, and you're going to start having these skewed thoughts that throughout your entire life, especially if you really don't talk to anyone like Edgar Allan Poe. He was a super introvert, and he just stayed home. He didn't do anything. I mean, he all he did was he abused his substances and drank his alcohol and wrote his world-renowned stories, and it got him to be famous, but at a very large cost of his mental stability. One interesting and surprising thing that I had learned while doing my research, I would say this is more so surprising to me, is that throughout all of these obstacles and all of these different setbacks throughout his life, he wrote these stories that are known by billions and billions of people. And another surprising thing is that he lived in my hometown, actually, in Baltimore, and some of my family had actually toured where he lived in his house, and that's one thing I would really like to do in my future. I think doing research on an author such as Edgar Allan Poe really made me understand his work better and understand where he was coming from a lot more, because of the fact that, whenever I was first reading his stories, it's hard to understand because you don't really understand why he's writing these stories like this, especially in the time period he's in. But once you do your research and find out this guy has really had a strange, distraught, just an unbearing life that most people probably couldn't live with, you really you start to understand, and you can move on with reading stories and enjoying them a lot better, actually. My research process was not difficult. It was actually quite interesting because I learned a lot more, such as his first marriage was actually with one of his cousins who was underage. So again, you can see how he really is not in the right mental state, because I'm pretty sure, I'm almost certain that even back then that was not sought after. So, and he still did it. So with that, you can really start to see that he's not in the mind, that he's not in the right mind. He's not where he's supposed to be. My writing process was difficult. My writing, trying to put the research into my own word, like not into my own words, but trying to put it into words was very difficult, and putting it into an essay format from a research format was very, very difficult for me. This essay was definitely one of my favorites because I like Edgar Allan Poe, but it was also one of that I did not like it just because of that reason, that it was much harder, that it was hard to enjoy because it was very difficult. But thank you for watching my video, Mrs. James. This has been a great semester. You're a great teacher. You're actually probably you're one of my favorite teachers ever. So just because of the fact that you really work with your students to make sure they can deepen their understanding of what we're reading or what we're writing about, and I really appreciate that personally, because I know I've been blowing up your phone the entire semester. So I appreciate you bearing with me throughout the semester, and I'm sure everyone else was doing the same thing, and just bearing with us all and helping us out and being a really good teacher. So thank you again.